It all began in the middle of nowhere. Literally. In the burning heat of California's Palm Desert, a few young musicians were doing something no one else dared to do. There were no clubs, no record labels, no scene, just sand, wind, and a desire to play music as loud as possible. They loaded amps into pickup trucks, drove into the desert, and powered their gear with gas generators. They called it generator parties. What came out of those nights wasn't just noise. It was the start of something new. The sound was heavy, hypnotic, and raw. The riffs echoed like thunder over the sand dunes. It was slow, dirty, and spiritual all at once. This wasn't Hollywood's version of rock. This was desert rock, born from heat, dust, and rebellion. Among those dusty gatherings was a group of kids who would later form Kyuss, a band that would become the heart of the desert scene. But even they didn't realize what they were starting. Behind the music, a quiet man was listening, shaping, and guiding the sound. The one who would later be called the true Godfather of Desert Rock. His name wasn't famous like Homme or John Garcia, but his influence reached deep. He wasn't just a producer. He was a spiritual guide, a philosopher of sound. And his ideas about music would inspire the next generation, from Kyuss to Queens of the Stone Age. But who was he? And what did desert rock really mean? The story begins under the desert sky, where the amps roared louder than the wind. Kyuss didn't just play music, they created an experience. Formed by teenagers in Palm Desert, John Garcia, Homme, Nick Oliveri, and Brant Bjork, Kyuss was the heartbeat of something wild and new. They didn't care about fame or radio play. They cared about the sound, thick, fuzzy, and low-tuned, like an earthquake trapped in a speaker. At first, no one outside their small desert community even knew they existed, but those who heard them couldn't forget. Kyuss sounded like Black Sabbath had collided with the desert sun. Their early gigs were chaos, people headbanging in sandstorms, cars forming makeshift stages, the smell of gasoline and dust in the air. Their debut albums, especially Blues for the Red Sun and Welcome to Sky Valley, became underground legends. Critics didn't know how to describe it. Too heavy for grunge, too trippy for metal, too real for the mainstream. But while the band played, someone else was helping them find that sound. Producer Chris Goss. He wasn't just recording them, he was teaching them how to shape chaos into art. Goss saw something deeper, a kind of honesty that only the desert could bring. Kyuss would eventually fall apart, but their music planted the seeds of something even bigger. Their sound would travel beyond Palm Desert, shaping a movement that would reach the world. And behind it all, Chris Goss was watching it happen, knowing that one day, the truth about the real Godfather of Desert Rock would need to be told. Chris Goss wasn't from the desert, but when he arrived, he understood it like no one else. He'd already made his mark as frontman of Masters of Reality, a band that mixed blues, psychedelia, and heaviness. But when he started producing Kyuss, something clicked. He saw in them the same raw energy he'd always searched for. Something pure, without industry polish or marketing. Goss became more than just their producer. He was their mentor. He taught them that every riff needed purpose, every sound had spirit. When he spoke about the desert, he didn't see emptiness. He saw possibility. The stillness, the space, the silence. It all became part of the sound. Goss helped Kyuss record albums that felt alive, organic, and spiritual. The heavy bass, the hypnotic rhythms. They weren't accidents. They were reflections of the environment itself. Later, Goss would work with Queens of the Stone Age, helping Homme evolve that same spirit into something sharper and more modern. He bridged two worlds, the raw chaos of Kyuss and the refined power of QOTSA. But even as fame grew around Josh and his new band, Goss stayed humble. He didn't care about being in the spotlight. For him, desert rock wasn't a brand. It was a philosophy, a way of understanding life, isolation, and sound. And in interviews years later, Goss would say something few expected, that the true Godfather of Desert Rock wasn't him or Homme. It was someone else entirely. Imagine growing up surrounded by miles of sand, heat, and silence. No clubs, no record labels, no fancy studios, just an empty desert. And an urge to make noise. That was the Palm Desert scene. The musicians there didn't wait for opportunity. They built it. They made their own shows, their own culture, their own sound. Generator parties became the symbol of freedom. Anyone could show up, plug in, and play. Bands swapped members like trading. Cards. One week you were in Kyuss, the next in Fu Manchu or Unida. There were no egos, no rules. Everyone was experimenting, finding new tones, new grooves. The desert itself was the real studio, the echo of the mountains, the dry air, the loneliness. All of it became part of the music. Players weren't trying to impress record execs. They were trying to express survival. And in that harsh beauty, something powerful was born, a genre that didn't belong to the city or the industry. Desert rock became a symbol of independence. But who was the one who made all these wild sounds connect? Who turned chaos into something timeless? The producer who saw the desert not as emptiness, but as a living force. Chris Goss knew that somewhere in that noise was truth. And in the next chapter, he'd finally begin to define what desert rock really was. Not as a sound, but as a way of being. Desert rock wasn't written in any rulebook, but it had laws. Silent ones. Rule 1. No fakery. You couldn't hide behind fancy production. Every mistake, every distortion had to be real. Rule 2. Space matters. The silence between notes was just as important as the riff itself. Rule 3. Play for yourself. Not for fame, not for the crowd, not for the charts. These rules came from the desert itself. In that empty space, the music had to mean something. If it didn't come from your soul, it evaporated into the heat. Chris Goss often said that the desert was honest. You couldn't fake emotion when you were surrounded by nothingness. Every note had to be earned. That's what separated desert rock from everything else. It wasn't about speed or skill. It was about feel. The best songs made you feel the wind, the distance, the loneliness. And yet, behind all this philosophy, there was still a mystery. The musicians kept pointing to someone. A quiet figure who first showed them how to find beauty in emptiness. The one Goss would later call the true godfather of desert rock. But before revealing who it was, Goss explained what made desert rock unique. Why it couldn't be copied, only lived. The desert makes you confront yourself. There's no audience, no fame, no city lights, just the sound of your own thoughts and your amplifier. That's why the music that came from there felt real. Bands like Kyuss, Yawning Man, Fatso Jetson, and later Queens of the Stone Age captured that energy. The riffs were thick and slow, the grooves deep and dusty. The vocals sounded distant, as if echoing off canyon walls. Chris Goss said the desert sound came from the land itself. The heat created tension. The silence demanded release. When musicians played, it wasn't just rock. It was a ritual. Goss didn't overproduce the music. He let it breathe. He wanted listeners to hear the imperfections, the grit. It's not about perfection, he said. It's about truth. That's what made desert rock timeless. It wasn't chasing trends. It was capturing a feeling. But when journalists started calling Goss the Godfather of Desert Rock, he laughed. I'm not the Godfather, he said. I just helped them find what was already there. So who was the Godfather? The one who played the first riffs in the sand, who built the foundation before anyone else cared? The answer, Goss said, went back to a band that even Kyuss admired, and a man whose guitar could make the desert sing. When people think of the desert sound, they think Kyuss, Queens of the Stone Age, or Chris Goss. But Goss himself told a different story. He said the one who truly started it all was Mario Lalli, the quiet mastermind behind Yawning Man. Long before Kyuss ever tuned their guitars low, Mario and his cousin Larry Lalli were hauling amps into the desert night, creating soundscapes that felt endless. Their jams weren't about structure or fame, they were about freedom. The guitars floated like mirages, the drums pulsed like a heartbeat buried under sand. Everyone in the desert scene knew Yawning Man. Josh Homme once said, "Without Mario, Kyuss wouldn't exist." Chris Goss agreed. To him, Lalli was the real spiritual father of the sound, the man who taught everyone that music could be both heavy and hypnotic, aggressive and peaceful. Goss explained that Yawning Man wasn't about showing off. It was about surrendering to the environment. They didn't try to control the sound. They became part of it. That idea, Goss said, was the soul of desert rock. So when asked who the godfather of desert rock was, Goss didn't hesitate. Mario Lalli, he said. He built the road before the rest of us even knew there was one. The fans were shocked. But those who lived through the Palm Desert scene knew it was true. Lally was there first, shaping the atmosphere and attitude that every band would later chase.